Before tuning in for this week's episode, I went back to the original run of Futurama to revisit a classic episode that's very important to this newest story, that being Kif Gets Knocked Up a Notch. BAM! Which I've always found this one to be a really unusual episode, but worth a rewatch in preparation for Children of a Lesser Bog, which is a direct continuation and the second episode of the Futurama reboot. And even though I really enjoyed last week's episode, this one exceeded all expectations. It honestly felt like a return to form by keeping the familiar ground already established, but still adding enough new content to justify this story being told in the first place. And there's some really excellent character building, mostly revolving around Amy Wong and Kif Croker and their reaction to becoming parents. I really like the nonsensical opening scene with Fry and Bender creating a toffee candy that's too sweet to consume, almost killing the professor.
You know I'm dying on the floor.
And offering out the sweets to the rest of the crew, Amy loses some teeth in the process of chewing, which is pretty grim even for an animated show. If you have a fear of the dentist, run away, because Zoidberg then offers to pencil her in for an appointment to repair the damage, where Amy checks her calendar showing an old alert from 3003, 20 years ago in the show's timeline, that being the due date.
It's time, my love.
Although simplistic, there's so much to appreciate from this scene alone. Of course, this is the first major throwback to the classic era of the show, where Amy checks the calendar and the date shown is the original air date of Kif Gets Knocked Up a Notch, which is meant to be January 12th, 2003, or 3003 in this instance. And seeing the iPhone make a comeback as well worked perfectly for this plot also. And you could argue there's perhaps an inconsistency where Amy entered the motherhood mode on her wristwatch in the original episode, but this could easily have been transferred over to the iPhone. Plus, it works better to serve the plot of this episode seeing Amy and Kif communicate throughout when at long distance. Speaking of Kif, he makes a dramatic entrance stating that it's time, and even fills in the gaps for those that didn't go back and watch the original episode. And even though you could argue, yes, this is most definitely recycled content, I can appreciate its inclusion, especially for newer fans of the show. If for whatever reason you haven't seen that original episode, you're still caught up to speed, and just like before, we learn a little bit more about Kif's species, adding more detail to the unusual kind of role reversal resulting in the male pregnancy.
Oh yeah, educate me, baby.
This brings up a strong debate throughout the episode over who is rightfully the mother figure to the tadpoles, which is something previously touched upon to a degree in the first episode, but is more of a focus this time around. And an important element of this story was Leela unintentionally causing the pregnancy in the first place by touching Kif's hand. Remember, no glove, no love, which is genuinely a brilliant euphemism made very literal in the context of Kif's species. You gotta wrap it up.
Let me at him! Get over there, Ted! Yeah!
Since the babies were produced because of how he feels for Amy and not just having his hand touched and protected, Amy is rightfully the mother, even though Leela contributed the DNA, and last time the pair said goodbye to the tadpoles, which is where Amy agrees that she will be ready for motherhood in 20 years. Here we are 20 years later, quite literally. Love how there's an actual payoff to this line of dialogue, which was probably written as a throwaway kind of thing, but for longtime fans of the show who didn't really expect anything to come of this, this is overall a wonderful continuation in my opinion. Kif, Amy, and her parents are present for the birthing ceremony on Amphibious 9, and this scene is important for introducing us to the new characters. As Kif said 20 years ago, their children will indeed sprout legs crawling back onto land as children, which is exactly what happened, only I didn't anticipate this scene to be so dark. I'm glad Futurama has really kept its edge, perhaps even doubling down on this kind of thing. When Kif had the tadpoles, there were obviously loads of them, and so to trim things down character-wise, we are left with 3 successful children.
4 of them made it. Well, 3.5.
Regrettably, the rest are all brutally killed by the indigenous wildlife. With the ceremony now complete, Amy is pleased to meet her children, Axel, Mandy, and Newt. Her parents, on the other hand, despite pushing for grandchildren in other episodes, they are instead very much grossed out by the alien grandchildren. And there's also the touchy subject of the character Leo Wong, Amy's dad, being recast. Originally, he was voiced by Billy West, but with the way progressive thinking has evolved over the past 10 years, an actor of Asian descent has been welcomed to the Futurama cast. And honestly, the voiceover, in my opinion, isn't great when compared to Billy West. I can understand the reasons behind wanting to go in this direction, which is fine, but Fyodor Shin's delivery seemed a little bit off, in my opinion. Hopefully, we see more of Amy's parents in the reboot, allowing him to cement himself as the new voice of Leo Wong. Speaking of familiar characters, the Grand Midwife was a pleasant but expected return, and she has been voiced phenomenally by Trez MacNeille since the very first introduction of the character, and I always found this one to be very humorous. I was surprised that she's only been featured in only a handful of episodes. I was certain we'd seen more of her throughout the series, but perhaps it's just the character leaving a very lasting impression. When the children visit Amy at the office, this sparks the debate over the parentage, where Leela doesn't really remember what happened with Kif and the glove situation. And to me, this seemed unusually out of character for her, where she blames drinking as the reason for not remembering. I'd like to think there's maybe more to this, that in a later episode there'll be a further explanation about why she would ignore certain events like this. We see a fun compilation of Kif and Amy parenting, going through various struggles, only for things to be made worse when Kif is ordered to return to the dupe under Zap Brannigan, and left to parent the kids on her own. Things fall apart very quickly, where the kids miss their father, and even Amy breaks down crying with them. This is one of those rare moments in the show where you honestly don't know whether to laugh or cry. This is surely played for laughs, but then again you can interpret a deeper meaning to this sequence. Amy is still young, and with being a new parent comes obvious anxieties. At least with Kif around, she has some form of stability, but without him, she then turns to Leela for help. This is where the challenge for parentage is initiated, with Leela being the biological mother, and the kids taking a liking to her for obvious reason. This is kind of what tips Amy over the edge, where jealousy becomes a huge issue, and adding to this, the Grand Midwife has been spying on them all throughout the entire episode, only to give a tough ultimatum between Amy and Leela to decide who will be the rightful parent to these children. And despite this being portrayed as a difficult challenge to overcome, the challenge turns out to be acceptance of being a parent and learning to love something more than anything. Therefore, Amy is made to be the parent, and you can argue this is kind of a cheap end for this storyline, but I respect it for not being dragged out into something that it doesn't need to be. Amy learns a lot about the potential risk of her children being taken away from her, and that truly does mean she cares for their well-being. And when the family is back together, Axel asks about the war stuff Kif had to do, and this fills in some of the gaps for the side story in this episode, which I really enjoyed seeing, where Kif and Brannigan reach out to an outpost on mission that has gone unresponsive to the dupe, and they land on this planet only to find the unnamed whale biologist character from Season 4.
I'm a whale biologist.
Who is now studying tardigrades, more commonly known as water bears. This time, however, they are full-sized and even kidnap Brannigan, causing Kif to jump into action and save the day. And I really liked how kind of progressive this element was for his character, especially the quippy one-liners, which were fantastic, mainly because nobody was around to hear them.
It's been a blast.
There have been a few moments throughout the series where Kif has left his comfort zone, and this is one that I really did like. And when shooting the tardigrades, his conscience gets the better of him, seeing his family amongst them, him being part of a family of 5 and there being a total of 5 water bears together. And so rather than shooting them, he saves them, and even takes out the unnamed biologist in the process. Not that he really appeared as a danger to the bears in my opinion, but his fate is still left unknown, which is kind of ominous by the end. Overall, I felt this episode solidified what to expect from the show going forward. I'm very excited to see what else the reboot has to offer. Hopefully we see more of Axel, Mandy, and Newt. I'd be very surprised if they were just one-off characters for this episode alone, but then again, we've seen that happen before where a potential significant character is introduced, but we don't see anything of them ever again. Here's looking at you, Marianne. Hopefully, we see her and Zoidberg together again this season. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode breakdown/review. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. As always, I love hearing your thoughts and opinions. If you want to see more Futurama reviews, please do leave me a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, DVD Review Studios.
Are you threatening me?